The year is 1966. Vietnam is burning. On one side, North Vietnam, backed by the Soviet Union and China. On the other, South Vietnam, supported by the full military and financial weight of the United States. America had poured in its money, its weapons, its best men. And still, the war was slipping away. Reports kept flooding into Washington. Sir, the enemy doesn't follow the rules. Sir, the jungle makes them invisible. Sir, nothing we're doing is working. All of these reports landed on the desk of one man sitting in the Pentagon, staring at spreadsheets filled with numbers. Not a battlefield general, not a decorated war hero. This was Robert McNamara, the newly appointed U.S. Secretary of Defense, and in front of him were only two options, very little time, and 300,000 lives hanging in the balance. Option 1, end the war, which politically was suicide, career over, America humiliated, legacy destroyed. Option 2, do something that would put the very conscience of humanity on the line. He chose option 2. But to truly understand what McNamara did, and why, you need to understand a dark history that most people never talk about. The hidden history of IQ itself. Go back to 1880. Sir Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, writes a cold, calculated question in his diary. Is human intelligence inherited or developed through environment, nature versus nurture? Galton's instinct was clear. He believed intelligence was genetic, hard-coded into the biology of a person from birth. And that belief came with a fear, a quiet, obsessive fear. If intelligence is fixed and less intelligent people reproduce faster, will society eventually collapse? No evidence, just fear, and that fear died with him. But 25 years later, in 1905, two French psychologists, Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon, created the first real intelligence test. Simple tasks, following moving objects, recognizing patterns. Short-term memory challenges. The entire purpose was humanitarian, identify children who were struggling so they could be given more support. Binet was explicit. Intelligence is not fixed at birth. Do not use this test as a permanent label. His intentions were good, but his timing was catastrophic. Because the early 20th century was one of the most unstable, violent, and desperate periods in human history. World wars, political upheaval, the price of human life measured in coins. And into that darkness, Binet's tool crossed the Atlantic to America, where everything changed. American psychologists Henry Goddard and Lewis Terman took a helping tool and turned it into a labeling machine. They believed, like Galton, that intelligence was genetically fixed, inherited, unchangeable, and so if someone scored low on their test, they invented a clinical scientific word for it. Moron, coined by Henry Goddard, intended as a medical category. But the impact was surgical, because once a word enters schools, gets quoted in courtrooms, gets normalized in newspapers, it stops being just a word. It becomes a perception. A permanent judgment baked into how society sees certain people. Then Lewis Terman reformatted Binet's test into what we now call the Stanford-Binet IQ test. And the moment intelligence became a number, institutions embraced it completely. Because institutions love predictability, numbers are predictable. What followed was one of history's most chilling examples of science being weaponized by politics. The scientific claim was, intelligence is inherited. The political translation, poverty is a natural condition. The scientific claim was, low intelligence correlates with crime. The political translation, crime is biological. The scientific claim was, intelligence predicts success. The political translation, failure is the destiny of morons. This wasn't science. This was a gun placed on science's shoulder, and the trigger was about to be pulled. By 1910 to 1925, America's welfare institutions were crumbling. Asylums were overflowing. State budgets were exploding. Real solutions, better education, housing reform, systemic change, were slow, expensive, and politically risky. So political leaders did what they've done throughout history. They found a scapegoat. The problem wasn't systemic failure. The problem was these people, the low IQ, the morons, the feeble-minded, burdening society. And a pseudo-scientific theory emerged with a terrifying solution: sterilize them. This theory was called eugenics. In 1927, the Supreme Court case Buck v. Bell handed down its verdict. One line, no debate. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Doctors were protected. Governments were empowered. What had been scattered, quiet sterilizations became legally shielded mass procedures. In America, over 60,000 people were forcibly sterilized under eugenic laws. Nazi Germany sterilized 400,000, primarily those with low IQ or mental illness. Sweden, 60,000. Denmark, 11,000. This wasn't genocide with guns and gas. This was cold, calculated system optimization. And now enter Robert McNamara, straight out of Ford Motor Company, the ultimate systems optimizer. But here's what separated McNamara from the eugenicists. He didn't see low IQ people as a liability to be eliminated. He saw them as an asset to be deployed. McNamara understood data. And the data told him something real, that the Armed Forces Qualification Test, which correlated strongly with IQ, did predict training performance. Higher IQ soldiers trained faster, made better decisions under pressure, adapted more quickly. That part was scientifically solid, no debate. But McNamara also believed deeply that modern war was a system optimization problem, not unlike running a factory. Military logistics, supply chains, communication networks, resource allocation. War, in his view, was won not by the bravest individual soldiers, but by whoever managed their systems most efficiently. So his logic went like this: if low IQ soldiers struggle with complex judgment calls, just remove that burden from them entirely. Centralize decision-making with high IQ officers at the top. Let the officers be the brain. Let the lower IQ soldiers be the hands. High IQ officers issue commands. Standard operating procedures automate execution. Low IQ soldiers follow the drill. After all, McDonald's runs on exactly this model. A 15-year-old with zero experience can make a burger on day one. Not because he's a culinary genius, but because the system is designed so he doesn't need to be. Just follow the SOPs. McNamara called it Project 100,000. Critics would call it McNamara's morons. And America would watch, unaware of just how wrong this was about to go. He even sold it to the public as social uplift. He promised that combat experience would increase the intelligence of these low IQ soldiers. That war would force their brains to adapt. That they'd come back smarter, more capable, better equipped for civilian life. He wasn't entirely pulling this from thin air. Just 2 years earlier, in 1964, neuroscientist Marion Diamond had shown that rats given more mental challenges developed denser, more connected cerebral cortexes, the core regulator of intelligence. If rat brains could grow, why not human brains? The logic was there. The hypothesis was reasonable, but there was one critical difference. Diamond's rats were in a lab. McNamara's experiment was in a war zone. Failure didn't mean feedback. Failure meant body bags, so what actually happened? The Department of Defense records, later pieced together through historical analysis, and the Pentagon papers leaked in 1971, revealed a pattern that was as tragic as it was predictable. Low IQ soldiers in combat died at approximately 3 times the rate of standard soldiers. Mental trauma cases were 3 to 5 times higher. Friendly fire incidents doubled. Veterans tell the stories, soldiers freezing when they spotted the enemy, loading the same rifle 2 or 3 times, pilots repeating the wrong checklist steps. Medical personnel operating on the wrong locations, poor situational awareness cascading into accidental fires. This wasn't cowardice, it was neurobiology. Let me explain exactly what was happening inside those soldiers' brains. Look at a basic IQ test, the kind called Raven's matrices. You see shapes, patterns change. You have to identify the rule behind those changes and predict the next answer. No language required, no memorized formulas, just raw pattern recognition and logical reasoning. This ability is called fluid intelligence, and it's what IQ actually measures. When the brain encounters a completely novel problem, how quickly can it impose structure on randomness? Here's what happens neurologically when you solve one of these problems. First, pattern perception. Your visual cortex detects shapes, sizes, orientations. Everyone does this roughly equally. IQ differences don't really emerge here. Second, pattern relations. This is where the split begins. Information flows to the parietal cortex, your brain's dimensional playground. It doesn't think in words, It thinks in space. This is the region that tells you how to navigate a staircase just by looking at it. For an IQ test, the parietal cortex has to identify which elements are relevant, what relationships exist between them, and hold multiple variables simultaneously in working memory. High IQ brains chunk this efficiently. They can hold 4, 5, even 6 variables in working memory at once, separating signal from noise, isolating independent patterns, running logical calculations in parallel. Low IQ brains get overwhelmed. The variables blur together. Noise and signal become indistinguishable, working memory capacity bottlenecks at just 2 to 3 items. The frontoparietal network, the coordinating system between the logical prefrontal cortex and the spatial parietal cortex, is less densely connected. White matter pathways are thinner. Processing is slower and less parallel. This is the core biology of IQ differences, and it matters enormously in one specific context. Simulate a battlefield. You are a soldier. In the next 10 seconds, gunfire from the left, uneven terrain on the right, radio command coming through, smoke ahead, one teammate is down, ammunition is limited, enemy position unclear. 6 to 7 signals, all simultaneous, all high stakes. A high IQ trained soldier chunks these into 3 constraint clusters almost automatically. Left gunfire plus smoke plus teammate down, enemy pressure zone. Uneven terrain plus no cover plus low ammo, movement constraint. Radio command plus timing, decision window, 3 chunks, clear structure, controlled response, no cognitive overload. A low IQ soldier processes these serially, one by one, and the brain hits overload. Focus locks onto the most immediate stimulus, usually the gunfire, and everything else becomes invisible. The result: freeze, blind firing, or movement in the wrong direction entirely, not cowardice, brain overload. And here's what McNamara fundamentally missed. The difference between a training field and a battlefield is stakes. High-stakes situations create intense stress responses. Cortisol floods the system. And under that kind of acute stress, working memory shrinks by 40 to 50%, and abstract reasoning collapses proportionally. A soldier whose baseline working memory is high still has enough left to function, even after that collapse. A soldier whose baseline is already low. After the stress-induced collapse, they're operating at near zero. This is why low IQ soldiers performed adequately in structured drills and training scenarios, and went completely blank the moment they stepped onto a real battlefield. McNamara understood system design. He never accounted for the failure modes of neurobiology under extreme stress. And what about the survivors? The ones who made it back? Researchers tracked them. Compared them to low IQ civilians from similar socioeconomic backgrounds who had never served. The results were the exact opposite of everything McNamara had promised. IQ increase? Zero evidence. Post-war life outcomes? Worse than the control group. Employment rates lower, mental health, significantly more PTSD, instability, and substance abuse. Lifetime earnings net negative compared to those who never served. The war didn't upgrade these men. It exposed their cognitive ceiling, and then it shattered them against it. Hamilton Gregory, war veteran, historian, and psychiatrist, documented this entire story in his book, McNamara's Folly. If you want the full picture, it's required reading. Now, here's where the story takes a genuinely unexpected turn. Because if IQ is such a massive advantage, why aren't all the world's greatest leaders, generals, scientists, and entrepreneurs the people with the highest IQ scores? Take Richard Feynman. Nobel Prize winner. Solved some of the most complex equations in the history of physics, quantum electrodynamics, particle behavior, fundamental forces of the universe. Widely considered one of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century. His self-reported IQ? Approximately 122 to 125. Exceptional, yes, but not stratospheric. Not top 0.1%. How is that possible? Because the advantage of IQ beyond a certain threshold flattens out. Lewis Terman, the same psychologist who built the Stanford Binet test, ran history's longest-running IQ study beginning in 1921. He selected 1,500 children, all with IQs above 135, top 1%. He called them his termites. He followed them for 6 decades, from childhood to old age. The results were striking in a very specific way. These children grew up to be healthier than average, better educated than average, higher earners than average. They became doctors, engineers, professors, managers, solidly upper middle class, stable, productive lives. But no Einstein emerged. No Feynman, no world-changing discoveries, zero Nobel Prizes, zero paradigm-shifting breakthroughs. And here's the irony that cuts to the bone. 2 children who didn't make Terman's IQ cutoff, who were filtered out of the study because they didn't qualify, went on to win Nobel Prizes. William Shockley, Luis Alvarez, transistors, particle physics, they changed the world. The ones inside Terman's genius group lived well, changed nothing. What this tells us is uncomfortable but essential. Around an IQ of 120 to 125, the cognitive ceiling effectively plateaus. Working memory bandwidth caps at roughly 4 variables. Abstract reasoning becomes sufficient. Processing speed gains a little, but you calculate faster, not better. The direction of your thinking doesn't improve. Beyond this point, the real question stops being how fast can you think and starts being what are you thinking about. IQ becomes a gun, powerful, dangerous. But a gun pointed in the wrong direction is worse than no gun at all. This is why extraordinarily intelligent people still make catastrophically stupid decisions. This is why brilliant analysts get destroyed in real-world competition by people with average intelligence but extraordinary focus, obsession, and pattern of behavior. The higher levels of intelligence, the ones that actually separate people who make history from those who simply serve the system, operate above the level of IQ. They involve something else entirely. Robert McNamara wasn't a monster. He was a brilliant man, genuinely brilliant, who made one of the costliest intellectual errors in modern military history. He understood systems, he understood data, he understood optimization. What he didn't understand, and what cost 300,000 people their futures, their health, and in many cases their lives, was the neurobiology of the human mind under conditions it was never designed to withstand. He treated war like a factory. He forgot that humans aren't machines. He saw IQ as a resource to be managed. He forgot that a mind under catastrophic stress is a different mind entirely. And when the system failed, as systems built on flawed assumptions always do, the men who paid the price weren't the policymakers. They weren't the generals. They weren't the data analysts in Washington. They were the soldiers, young men handed rifles, sent into jungles, and told their performance would give them a better life. It didn't. The data says exactly the opposite. This story isn't just history, it's a mirror. Every time we reduce a human being to a single metric, a test score, a number, a category, we create the conditions for exactly this kind of catastrophe. Not always in war zones. Sometimes in classrooms, sometimes in hiring decisions, sometimes in how we see ourselves. The question of what intelligence actually is, and what the higher levels of it look like beyond raw IQ, is one of the most important questions you can sit with. Because IQ measures one real and important thing, but it doesn't measure the thing that decides whether you spend your life running a system or building a new one. That question and that answer is what we're going to explore next.